My name is Olivia. I married Ethan when I was young and full of dreams. We were high school sweethearts, and I believed we'd be happy forever. My father, a successful businessman who owned a furniture factory, gave us a beautiful house as a wedding gift. For years after we got married, our son George was born. As time went on, I dedicated myself to being the perfect wife and mother. I kept our home spotless, cooked delicious meals, and made sure George had everything he needed. Meanwhile, Ethan worked as a sales manager, but his career wasn't going as well as he had hoped. One night, he came home angry and frustrated. "I can't do this anymore, Olivia," he yelled, slamming his fist on the kitchen table. The loud noise startled me. I'm working so hard, but it feels like I'm getting nowhere. I tried to stay calm. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked. His face brightened suddenly. "Your dad. He could give me a job at his factory, something senior. Can't you talk to him for me?" I hesitated. My father was always fair in his business dealings, and I didn't want to ask for special treatment. But when I saw the desperate look in Ethan's eyes, I nodded. "Okay, I'll ask him." The next day, I visited my father at his office. I felt nervous as I spoke. "Dad, I need to ask you something. It's about Ethan. He's really unhappy at his job, and I was wondering if you might have a position for him at the factory." My father thought for a moment before nodding. "All right, I'll give him a chance. But he'll have to prove himself, just like everyone else." When I told Ethan the news, he was thrilled. He picked me up and spun me around in the kitchen. "You're amazing, Olivia. This is going to change everything for us." And for a while it did. Ethan started earning more, and our financial struggles eased. But as one problem went away, a new one began. My relationship with Ethan's mother, Judith. Judith was very protective of her son and never really liked me. She often came over uninvited, criticized how I ran the house, and demanded my attention constantly. One afternoon, as I was trying to prepare dinner, Judith barged through the front door. "Olivia," she said sharply. "I need you to take me shopping right now," Judith said. I clenched my teeth. "Judith, I'm in the middle of cooking. Can it wait until tomorrow?" Her eyes narrowed. "Are you saying my needs aren't important? After all I've done for this family?" I swallowed my frustration, knowing arguing would only make things worse. "Of course not. Just give me a few minutes to finish here." Later, as I drove Judith to the mall, she complained about everything, my driving, my cooking, and even the way I parked. I couldn't help but wonder how my life had turned into this. I used to be smart and independent, but now it felt like all I did was cater to everyone else while my own dreams faded away. One especially bad afternoon, Judith stormed into the house without knocking, as always. "Olivia," she shouted, her voice already grating on my nerves. "I'm hungry. Make me something to eat." Biting back a sharp reply, I set aside the laundry and dragged myself to the kitchen. As I cooked, Judith sat at the table, criticizing everything I did. "You're using too much oil," she snapped. "And cut those vegetables smaller. Don't you know how to cook properly?" When I finally placed the food in front of her, I hoped she would eat quickly and leave. Instead, to my shock, she packed up all the food I'd made and stood up. "I'll be taking this with me," she announced. "I have bridge club tonight, and this will be perfect for snacks." I stared at her in disbelief. "But Judith, that was supposed to be our dinner." "Oh, you can always make more," she said, already heading for the door. "It's not like you have anything better to do with your time." As the door slammed shut, I sank into a chair, feeling completely defeated. I glanced at the clock. I now had less than an hour to make another meal before Ethan came home from work. When Ethan walked in, loosening his tie, he found me frantically cooking. "What's going on?" he asked. "Why isn't dinner ready?" I told Ethan what had happened with his mom, hoping he would understand or at least support me. Instead, his expression turned dark. "Mom was here, and you didn't make her feel welcome?" he demanded. "Olivia, you know how important family is to me. You should have been more accommodating." "Accommodating?" I repeated, shocked. "Ethan, she took our dinner and treats me like a servant in my own house." Ethan shook his head, clearly annoyed. "You're exaggerating. Mom just wants to feel loved and appreciated." Is that really too much to ask? We ate the quickly thrown-together meal in silence. Sitting across from Ethan, who once was my best friend and high school sweetheart, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. The growing distance between us was impossible to ignore. One evening, Ethan came home from work in a terrible mood. His face was red with anger as he slammed the door shut. "Olivia," he shouted, "your father is a tyrant, a bully. He humiliates people and uses them like pawns in his little games." I froze, shocked by his words. My father had always been kind and fair as far as I knew. "What happened?" I asked carefully. Ethan's eyes burned with fury. "I stood up for an employee today. Your father was treating him unfairly, and I couldn't just sit there and watch. Do you know what your precious daddy did? He fired me. Right there, on the spot." My head spun. This didn't sound like my father at all. "There must be some misunderstanding," I said. "Let me talk to Dad and hear his side of the story." "No," Ethan yelled, making me flinch. "You will not speak to your father. You will not speak to your mother. As far as we're concerned, they don't exist anymore. Do you understand?" I trembled, too shocked and scared to argue. "Okay," I whispered. In the days that followed, Ethan found another job and started earning well again, but something between us had changed. The love and warmth I used to feel for him had been replaced by fear and resentment. As the years went by, our son George grew up. He often asked about his grandparents, but Ethan would shut down the conversation every time. "You have one grandmother," he would say firmly. "My mother. That's all you need to know." When George got ready to leave for college in another city, I felt a mix of pride and sadness. My baby was growing up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing the only ally I had in the house. Over the next few years, my life fell into a dull routine. Every day felt the same, and the dreams I once had seemed like a distant memory. I did everything Ethan asked and put up with Judith's constant criticism. Without George around, their treatment of me became even worse. One afternoon, while I was scrubbing the kitchen floor under Judith's watchful eye, the phone rang. I reached for it, but Judith snatched it away. "I'll answer it," she snapped. "You focus on cleaning that floor. I can still see spots." I clenched my teeth and went back to scrubbing, but I couldn't help overhearing her side of the conversation. "Yes, this is Olivia's residence," Judith said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Who? Her father? I'm sorry, but Olivia isn't available to speak with you. Please don't call again." I froze and looked up. "Wait," I called out, but Judith had already hung up the phone. "That was your father," she said coldly. "I told him not to contact you again. You should be thanking me for protecting this family from those toxic people." Anger surged through me. "You had no right to do that," I said, my voice shaking. "He's my father. I should have been allowed to speak to him." Judith's eyes narrowed. "You ungrateful little." Before she could finish, Ethan walked in. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Judith immediately put on a hurt expression. "Oh, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "Your wife is being so disrespectful to me after everything I do for this family." Ethan turned to me, his face dark with anger. "Is this true, Olivia? Are you disrespecting my mother?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. I realized with a sinking heart that it didn't matter what I said. Ethan would always take Judith's side. A year passed after that phone call from my father. My life continued in the same suffocating routine, with Ethan and Judith tightening their control over me. Then, on a cool autumn morning, everything changed. The phone rang while I was making breakfast. Ethan was in the shower, and Judith hadn't arrived for her daily inspection of my housekeeping. For once, I was able to answer the call without anyone interfering. "Hello," I said hesitantly. "Olivia? Is that you?" The voice on the other end was familiar but distant. It was my father. "Olivia, it's your mother. She's very ill. The doctors don't think she has much time left. She needs you." "We both do." I felt a wave of emotions, sadness, guilt, and longing. Just then, I heard the bathroom door open. Ethan would be downstairs any minute. "I'll try, Dad," I whispered. "I promise I'll try." Then I quickly hung up the phone. When Ethan came into the kitchen, I was trying to stay calm. "Who is that on the phone?" he asked, his voice suspicious. I took a deep breath. "It was my father," I said quietly. "My mother is very sick, Ethan. She's dying. I need to go see her." Ethan's face hardened. "Absolutely not. We've been through this, Olivia. Your parents don't exist for us anymore." Something inside me broke. For the first time in years, I stood up to Ethan. "I'm going," I said firmly, "with or without your permission. She's my mother, and I won't let her die without saying goodbye." Ethan's jaw tightened, his anger barely contained.
Fine.
"One day. That's all you get. Then you come back home where you belong." I nodded, too afraid to say more. One day was better than nothing. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone and called my son, George. When I told him what was happening, he surprised me by immediately offering to go with me. Relief washed over me. The next morning, George and I drove to my childhood home. When we arrived, my father greeted us at the door. He looked much older than I remembered, his face lined with grief. Without a word, he pulled me into a tight hug. He led us to my mother's room. She was lying in bed, pale and weak, but her eyes lit up the moment she saw me. "Olivia," she whispered, her voice shaky as she reached out a trembling hand. "My baby girl." I rushed her side and held her hand tightly. "Mom, I'm here."
I'm so sorry.
"Can you forgive me?" She gave me a soft smile. "There's nothing to forgive, sweetheart. I'm just glad you're here now." We spent the whole day by her side, sharing memories and trying to make up for the years we'd lost. As the sun began to set, her breathing grew shallow. She squeezed my hand and looked into my eyes. "Olivia," she said softly, "promise me something. Promise me you'll live your life. Really live it. Don't let anyone cage your spirit again." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. "I promise, Mom. I promise." She smiled one last time, then closed her eyes. Her hand went limp in mine. She was gone. Suddenly, my phone started ringing nonstop. I didn't need to look to know it was Ethan. I stepped into the hallway to answer, my heart heavy. "Where the hell are you, Olivia?" Ethan's angry voice barked through the phone. "You were supposed to be back hours ago." "Ethan," I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I can't leave yet. My mom just passed away. I need to stay for the funeral." "Absolutely not," he roared. "I told you one day, and that's all you get. If you're not back by tomorrow, don't bother coming back at all." His words were both a threat and a promise. For a moment, I felt the urge to give in, to rush back to the life I knew. But then I thought of my mother's final words, urging me to truly live my life. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm staying." Before he could respond, I ended the call, my heart pounding. For the first time in our marriage, I had defied Ethan. It was both terrifying and freeing. The next few days passed in a blur as we grieved and prepared for my mother's funeral. On the day of the funeral, we stood quietly around my mother's grave. My phone started ringing again. Ethan's name lit up on the screen. Without thinking, I hit the speaker button, planning to silence it quickly. Ethan's loud, angry voice echoed for everyone to hear. "Olivia, this is your last chance. If you don't come home right now, I swear I'll come and drag you back myself. You ungrateful piece of trash, after everything I've done for you." Embarrassed and furious, I quickly ended the call. My face burned with shame, and I could feel the stunned eyes of everyone around me. George looked furious, his jaw clenched tightly, and my father's expression was filled with concern. After the service ended, my father gently pulled me aside. "Olivia," he said softly, "we need to talk." We walked to a quiet corner of the cemetery. My father took a deep breath, his face serious. "Sweetheart, there's something I should have told you years ago. Something about Ethan." I stood frozen as my father revealed the truth about why Ethan had really left the company. It wasn't because he had stood up for an employee. My father had caught him stealing money, taking funds from the company and its clients by manipulating prices and pocketing the extra cash. I fired him to protect the business and our clients, my father explained, his voice heavy. I didn't tell you at the time because I thought you loved him. I didn't want to come between you. But now, hearing how he treats you and seeing the life you're living, I can't stay silent anymore. It felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. For years, I had believed Ethan's lies. I had let him cut me off from my family and endured his and Judith's emotional abuse, all based on a lie. There's more, my father continued, his tone even more serious. I recently heard from a friend that Ethan's current company is under investigation. There are financial discrepancies, Olivia. I think he's doing the same thing again. As the weight of his words hit me, I felt a strange mix of despair and relief. The life I thought I knew was falling apart, but at the same time, I felt like I was finally waking up. From the ruins of everything I had believed, something new, something stronger, was beginning to take shape. The day after the funeral, I saw a chance to start fresh. My father, George, and I decided to go back to my house. To our surprise, we found the place bustling with activity. Judith's friends were everywhere, and the smell of food wafted from the open windows. When we walked in, it was clear there was a full-blown party in progress. Judith, holding a glass of wine, spotted us first. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at my father and George. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're late, Olivia. My birthday celebration started hours ago." I froze, stunned. In the chaos of the past few days, I had completely forgotten about Judith's birthday. Before I could say anything, she shoved a dirty rag into my hands. "Don't just stand there," she snapped. "Start cleaning up. These tables won't wipe themselves." My father, who had been silently watching, suddenly spoke up, his voice booming. "How dare you speak to my daughter like that?" he thundered, silencing the room. "She's not some servant to follow your orders. She's a grown woman, and she deserves respect." Judith let out a sharp laugh. "Respect," she sneered. "She gave up any right to respect when she married my son. Her family is Ethan and me now. You're nothing to her anymore." I stood there, shocked, as my father and Judith argued. Their voices grew louder, and the guests began shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or leave. Suddenly, Ethan stormed into the room. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his eyes locking onto me. "Olivia, why aren't you serving the guests? And what are they doing here?" He pointed angrily at my father and George. Something inside me broke. Years of frustration and anger came pouring out. "No, Ethan," I said, my voice strong and steady. "I'm not serving anyone. I'm not cleaning up. And I'm done staying silent." The room fell completely silent. Even Judith seemed caught off guard. "I know the truth, Ethan," I continued, pulling out the divorce papers I had hastily prepared. "I know why you really left my father's company. And I'm done. I want a divorce." For a moment, Ethan looked like he might explode, or even lunge at me. But then, realizing he was outnumbered, he seemed to deflate. "Fine," he snarled. "Take your divorce. But don't think you'll get a penny from me." I couldn't help but laugh. "This house is mine, Ethan. My father gave it to us as a wedding gift, remember? You're the one who needs to leave." Ethan and Judith glared at us, but left shortly after, slamming the door behind them. As the house grew quiet, I sank onto the couch, suddenly feeling drained. George, who had been quietly watching everything unfold, finally spoke. "Mom, why didn't you tell me things were this bad?" I sighed, guilt weighing on me. "I'm sorry, George. I thought I was protecting you, but now I see I was teaching you the wrong lessons about love and respect." In the weeks that followed, my life changed completely. I started the divorce process and focused on rebuilding my life. True to his word, my father stood by me every step of the way. One afternoon, as we sat in his study discussing plans for the future, he brought up something unexpected. "Olivia," he said gently, his tone serious. "I've been thinking. I'm not getting any younger, and the factory needs fresh ideas. How would you feel about coming to work with me? I blinked, surprised. Me? But Dad, I don't know anything about running a business. He chuckled. Neither did I when I started.
You're smart, Olivia.
You can learn. Besides, it's time you had a chance to spread your wings. Over the next few months, I dove headfirst into learning the ropes of the business. My father was a patient teacher, guiding me through everything it took to run the furniture factory. To my surprise, I discovered a passion for design and innovation I never knew I had. Meanwhile, the divorce dragged on, with Ethan fighting me at every turn. He even contested the ownership of the house and tried to turn George against me. But in the end, justice prevailed. I was awarded the house and financial compensation for the years of emotional abuse. Ethan, on the other hand, faced charges for his fraudulent activities. Deep in debt and with his reputation ruined, he could no longer hold senior positions. Judith's influence over my life also faded. The last I heard, she had moved in with a distant relative, her social circle shrinking after the truth about Ethan came to light. 4 years passed quickly, filled with hard work and new beginnings. Then one quiet Thursday morning, my father called me into his office. His face was serious, and as he gestured for me to sit, I felt my heart tighten. Olivia, he said, his voice filled with emotion. I'm not well, Olivia, my father said softly. The doctors, they don't think I have much time left. The world seemed to spin. No, Dad, I whispered, grabbing his hand. He gave my fingers a gentle squeeze. It's okay, sweetheart, he said with a sad smile. I've had a good life. And now I can leave knowing you're strong, that you're free, and that you'll be okay. Tears streamed down my face as he continued. I'm leaving everything to you, Olivia. The business, the house, all of it. You've proven yourself. I know you'll take good care of everything. In the weeks that followed, we spent as much time together as we could. My father's health worsened quickly, but his spirit stayed strong. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy that was now my responsibility to carry forward. News of his passing and my inheritance spread quickly through our small town. I was still adjusting to my new reality when, one crisp autumn afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I froze. Standing there was Ethan, holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing an apologetic expression. Olivia, he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it in years. I'm so sorry about your father. May I come in? Warily, I stepped aside and let him in. We stood in the foyer, an awkward silence hanging between us. Finally, Ethan spoke. I've been thinking a lot, Olivia. About us, about our life together. I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I've changed. My mother passed away last month. She was the one who always came between us. Now there's nothing stopping us from being happy together again. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Moments later, the front door opened and a tall, distinguished-looking man walked in. Olivia, darling, I'm home, he called out. Then he stopped, his gaze falling on Ethan. Ethan looked between us, confusion and anger spreading across his face. Who the hell is this? He demanded. The man stepped forward, extending his hand to Ethan. I'm Richard, Olivia's husband. And you are? Ethan ignored the outstretched hand, his face twisting with rage. Husband? What the hell, Olivia? You got remarried? You traitor. Richard's expression hardened. He stepped between Ethan and me, his voice calm but firm. I suggest you leave.
Now.
I suggest you leave now and never talk to my wife like that again, Richard said, his voice calm but firm. Ethan lunged forward, but Richard was faster. He grabbed Ethan's arm and firmly escorted him to the door. This is your only warning, Richard said steadily. Stay away from Olivia. If you ever come near her or disrespect her again, you'll regret it. With that, Richard shut the door as the sound of screeching tires faded into the distance. He turned to me, his expression soft with concern. Are you okay, love? I nodded and stepped into his arms. I'm fine. I'm just glad you're home. I looked up at him, a small smile on my lips. And I'm glad you waited for me all these years. Richard chuckled, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. I've loved you since high school, Olivia. I would have waited forever if I had to. As we stood there in each other's arms, I couldn't help but reflect on how life had come full circle. Richard and I had been high school sweethearts before Ethan entered my life. After my divorce, Richard and I reconnected, and the feelings we once had grew into something even stronger. 7 months ago, we married in a quiet ceremony, starting a new and hopeful chapter together. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from George. Mom, great news. Teresa's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother. In the months that followed, life settled into a peaceful and joyful rhythm. George and his wife, Teresa, moved back to our city to be close to family as they prepared for their baby's arrival. They even joined us at the factory, bringing fresh ideas and enthusiasm to the business. It felt like a new beginning, filled with love, family, and the happiness I had waited so long to find.